Welcome to our Driving Digital Transformation in State and Local Government Summit. My name is Ed Blake. I'm facilitating these sessions. This session is really important. We think this is analyzing and reporting on police outcomes, which is very important, obviously. We have a number of our expert practitioners here with us today. We have two expert practitioners today to help us through identifying problems, solutions, etc. Everything from reporting through staffing and deployment, all the way through to the government cloud solutioning. So I'm really lucky to have these gentlemen with us today. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll go to our agenda.
Hey, I'm Eric Jacobson. I'm a managing consultant at Catapult. I serve primarily as a project manager and product success manager, which essentially means helping a product owner at an agency or department or company that we're working with manage their roadmap while managing a project to deliver on some outcomes.
My name is Alex Carvalho. I'm also a managing consultant at Catapult. I serve as a solution and database architect for our solutions for government and integrating the different aspects of the Microsoft cloud and framework to resolve issues.
Thanks, gentlemen. So, as we know, police departments have used data for a long time. That's evolved over time, obviously. So what we'll talk about a lot today is how things have evolved. I'm sorry, and data sources, improving KPIs, but on top of improving KPIs, how to report on them, better ways to report on them. So we're going to jump in and show the agenda really quickly here. Again, reporting KPIs, trending, all of that stuff. Really important things to know around officer performance and other things. And then we can talk about staffing deployment, historical data, looking forward-looking data as well, data sources and integrations around investigation, the actual implementation, who's there, SMEs, etc., who's needed, and then we'll end up with the government cloud solutioning. So again, I'm going to kick it to our two attendees for our discussion today, and kicking it to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Sure. So traditionally, when people have thought about police department KPIs and use of data, the classic examples have been the rates of crime within their jurisdiction broken down by different types of crime. Think of, property crime versus violent crime, and then all the subcategories that each of those fall into, as well as their response to those crimes. In other words, how quickly were they on the scene? Were they able to achieve some kind of outcome that was desirable? What's the best possible way to resolve a crime that's been reported? Did they get there on a timely basis? So on and so forth. Those are really, when you think about state level reporting, where local agencies and departments have to report up to a state entity and to the FBI. There are things like the NIBRS data set and the UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting Standards. Those are just pretty basic data sets that more or less all police departments have to report on to some degree or another up to the federal government and their state oversight. And I know that those have kind of evolved a little bit recently. Alex, what are some of the sort of more recent metrics that you've been asked to add data for and track?
Two of the more recent ones that we've been asked about have been officer-involved incidents, officer-involved shootings, as well as hate crimes have been the two most recently the requests that we've had.
Yeah, so when you think about KPIs like those are emergent because there have been emerging problems, or at least emerging sort of urgency with response to those problems. What all of these things have in common is they will show you kind of what crime rates are, what the response rates are, sometimes break it down by problem areas. Are they too many of a particular type of crime? Are there too many officer reported involved shootings? So on and so forth. The goal, obviously, of law enforcement is to minimize the amount of crime and to be there and respond as quickly as possible to the most severe crimes to make sure that they're addressed and that the public is protected. But when the numbers are off, like when you're looking at those KPIs and you're not hitting your targets as a department, either because crime is, spiking, or you have fewer officers than you need, things like that, they highlight where there are problems. They don't necessarily give you all of the tools that you have or could have at your disposal to solve those problems. And so really what some of the other topics that we're going to talk about, in addition to kind of how to streamline that reporting of those KPIs, is how do you use other data sources that you have likely available to you at your typical police department to find ways to improve upon those metrics. For instance, staffing and deployment. So we can talk a little bit about that topic. So your response time to a particular instance of crime is going to depend on a number of variables, like how many police you have and whether they are ready to respond to a particular crime, but also how many of them and where are they located. You think about some of these police departments, especially in major cities, some of them are covering very broad geographic areas without a sort of commensurate number of officers per square mile to what you might see in a smaller jurisdiction with a smaller geographic footprint. A lot of agencies, a lot of police departments do capture data on where their officers are currently deployed, where they're based from, where their sort of patrols and things like that are operating. And then many, especially in cities where there are special events, you think of like a sporting event or a parade or any number of different things, where they have to proactively plan to have additional police on duty in a given area in anticipation of a forward-looking event. What a lot of departments have not done is looking at those response rates, those times that we talked about on the first topic of just that standard reporting, and using a systematic approach with the data that they have available to say, where are the geographic areas or types of crimes that we need to really work on responding to more quickly, and what would it take to do that? So part of what I think a lot of departments could stand to do is take a look at what data they have on their staffing and their deployment patterns, and look at whether they can't forecast that forward somewhat. Alex, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that a lot of the police departments that we've worked with is that there's many different systems, record management systems. Sometimes they'll have 2 or 3 because they've gone historically from one to another, and they need to bring all that information into one place, and that's usually a challenge, right? Because it's difficult systems to work with. There's data quality issues potentially that have to be addressed systematically to really get those accurate results on the reporting.
So yeah, you mentioned record management systems. Like think about the police reports, right? Back on TV and in black and white TV shows, that's a notepad that somebody's writing something on, right? Now it's a laptop or some device in their car. that's all getting fed into one system. The
Sometimes
computer,
more than one too,
yeah,
right? So
but they may have changed systems over the last 10 years, 5 years even, right?
correct.
They've also will often have like a 911 computer-aided dispatch system that keeps track of when did the call come in, who reported it, when did a dispatch call go out to the police or other first responders, and then from there, how long did it take for them to get on scene? So when did they report and say, I'm here, I'm responding to this incident? And then if they have personnel data in terms of the number of officers that they had in the area or that were supposed to be deployed in that area, that may be housed in a third database or third application even, right? So there's a lot of data sources that need to be curated and kind of pulled together. And to your point, data quality is important as well. So there may be some governance and data cleanup aspects to building a well-oiled machine to address all of the different angles that they might be looking at from a how do we improve our response time perspective, just as an example.
Sometimes that data resides in spreadsheets, depending on the ability for them to get that information quickly as well. So it's not just one type of system. There's some are databases, some are spreadsheets, some are third-party vendor systems that all have the information that these police departments need to bring together into one place.
And one thing we didn't really touch on, as far as just investigations go, is with all of these data sources, if they have a police report where the perpetrator had been stopped for a traffic ticket, right? Because not everybody who's a victim or a perpetrator of a crime has a perfect driving record, right? So you might have pulled this person over before. You might have their phone number and email address somewhere in your sort of a needle in your haystack of data someplace, right? So when you're trying to solve a crime, if you know who the victim is, if you know who someone involved is, you know what their contact information is, finding all the other records across all of those other systems that match that contact information or some attribute of that data that would help you to draw a line. Think of your sort of bulletin board with the pieces of yarn going across it, right? Like going back to the TV example, right? How do you draw sort of relationships between the data sources that you have? A lot of that becomes more possible when you start warehousing and normalizing and being able to kind of understand where your data is, how it's formatted, and trying to find common threads between those data elements to actually solve crimes. Try and track down a person of interest based on data that you might have about them from a year ago when they got pulled over for a speeding ticket. When it comes to implementation, there are some specific concerns that police departments have to grapple with and comply with. One of them is called CJIS. It's basically criminal justice data and protecting it. Basically, any data that you're collecting about crimes that have not been adjudicated yet, this is private data that it's very important that for law enforcement agencies of all size and scope to use those for law enforcement purposes. But we want to make sure, regulators want to make sure that that data is not being used for non-law enforcement purposes, right? We're not using this data to market products. We're not using this data to sell bail bonds or whatever the case may be. We're using this data to sort of manage our response to crime and solve crimes. So Alex, can you talk a little bit about like some of the unique constraints and how I guess Microsoft and our team works around some of those things to make sure we're compliant? as we work on projects like this?
Yeah, sure. With the Microsoft platform, we have several options for our clients, especially when it comes to this CGIS information, where the cloud environment is protected at a higher level than a normal commercial Azure environment would be. Thus, putting in some extra safeguards just for this particular type of information, as well as following the best practices of Microsoft when it comes to protecting that secure data.
I know we have like a high level architecture drawing we can throw up here, but one thing that is not depicted in this graphic is the people that are working on this project. So just one thing I want to call out quickly, because I know we mentioned SMEs on the prior slide, is because a lot of these systems have evolved over time and the people that work within the department are most familiar with how they work, we're going to want to always involve those folks, the end users, the sponsors, the people who have been maintaining this data, so your data stewards in these projects. They should already be cleared to work with CGIS data because that's what they're doing already day to day. But it's very important to get feedback from them along the way so that we can make sense of the data, we know what to find where, and when we present sort of reporting and other solutions, we get feedback on it as we work so that we can make sure that it's going to be something that actually helps them solve the problems that they have. Because we've all done several of these projects, we're familiar with the space, but not to the extent that they are. So sorry for that aside, but I want to talk quickly about government cloud architecture and what some of the major tools are that we use there.
Yeah, sure. So this is just an example of just the modern data warehouse. So on the left-hand side, you have the different types of information that could reside at a police department in different formats, right? There's spreadsheets, there's databases, there could be just flat CSV files. And so the goal is to try to get that all in one place. So that's kind of what the Azure Data Factory tool does. It ingests the data into the cloud storage. And then you have the ability to train machine learning modules to actually detect those patterns that Eric was talking about, to find those patterns within the data from all the different sources. And then you build a model that people would then report on, which is what the SMEs would be using, which is Power BI with analysis services there on the far right-hand side. But just a visualization of it so that they can slice and dice the data gives them a tool. So it's not just a report. It's like you get from a standard record management system. It's actually an analytical tool that allows you to then turn over the control to the SMEs so they don't have to do all the data mining themselves. And it gives them the ability to find these different patterns and new things that would normally take them days to do. Now just takes a few minutes. So requires some planning, as Eric said, with the subject matter experts to kind of develop that end result, but it's usually for the benefit of all at the end.
Okay, so if you think about somebody manually compiling even the data that they report to the state and federal government, they're, to do that manually, there's almost certainly some spreadsheet involved, right? They're doing multiple queries against multiple systems to pull the data. They're joining it all together in some tool. When they notice that there's a discrepancy or something doesn't match between the various data sources, they're having to figure out how to explain that or fix whatever the data problem is. They're formatting it into a Word document or whatever it is that they have to submit, and then they're sending on its way. If you can have all of that data curated, refresh automatically, flag records that have data quality issues so that they can be corrected as they occur, and then generate a report that they can just ship directly, even for that very basic case where they're reporting uniform crime statistics, you can save them significant time that they could be spending on doing deeper analysis with these other tools we were talking about. to actually improve those metrics rather than just say, here are some problems, let's brainstorm on what we could do to solve them, right? Like, let's look at the data and see what the data tells us that we could do to solve them. That's the next step.
And then also, you know, for the investigation side, some of that data getting ingested into one central place could help them find the patterns as well when they're doing researches for their cases.
Absolutely. And this is all, you know, a field that is growing rapidly, and that people are coming up with all kinds of new solutions for things that could be done with the data that they're collecting and storing. Even when you think about like body and car cam video, a lot of these agencies, the departments are required to capture and store that data. You can think of how some of the images of things like license plates and other things that they're collecting might come into play there when it comes to the investigative portion of what we talked about.
I mean, and that's another thing, Eric, that poses a great question is the amount of storage that they needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to grow as time goes on, right? And a lot of times the data is getting stored on just a central server or, you know, a file share, if you will. And, you know, those things aren't as flexible as a cloud solution that grows as you need it to grow. It usually involves an investment or capital investment to add more hardware to get more space to store more videos. Well, with the cloud, that's kind of built to be flexible and to grow as you grow. So definitely a scalable platform is needed for these government clients.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Eric. I'm sorry, you were going to say something else.
I was just going to say it's an exciting space to work in, and then I was going to hand it back to you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen. It was a really informative session. Great information. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So for our audience, we have an opportunity to connect more with our experts, get more information, and a short survey about how we did. I'm going to leave this up on the screen and just kick it back to the gentlemen and see if they have any other closing comments before we sign off.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Nothing for me as well. Thanks.
Thanks again, gentlemen. Thanks everybody for participating in this session. And as I say, please feel free to connect with us to learn more if you'd like to. And we're very interested in that short survey, so you can tell us any ideas that you have for improvement, anything that you particularly liked or didn't like, so that we can continue to continuously improve our discussions. Thanks again for your time, and look forward to the next session. Thank you.